Upon waking up in the morgue, the daughter of a wealthy man heard the voice of her fiancé who had come for identification. And as soon as she realized what awaited her, a luxurious foreign car stopped in front of the city hospital's morgue, and an imposing, still fairly young man got out. It was evident from everything that he had come due to a tragedy. He was dressed in mourning, his eyes, likely red from tears, hidden behind dark glasses. Even his gait showed that the man had experienced a serious misfortune. It's one thing if he is burying a grandparent, but what if it's someone just as young? Yes, the rich cry too, could think compassionate passers-by, and they would be right. Stephen Morris had come to retrieve the body of his fiancée Rachel, who had recently passed away suddenly from an unknown cause. It was no wonder he was in such a state. He could hardly believe that his beloved had suddenly died almost on the eve of their wedding. He had already been to the identification, seen the investigator, and answered questions about what, in his opinion, could have happened to a young, blooming, happy girl. But what could he know, being in such despair? Barely holding back tears, the young man spoke with difficulty. "This simply can't be. We saw each other the day before, everything was fine." No. She didn't complain about anything, only about being tired. But lately, she had often been tired. She was even planning to see a doctor, but she promised to go after the wedding. Didn't she have depression, maybe thoughts of suicide? The investigator continued to question. "What are you talking about? We were so happy, so happy. What am I to do now? You know, I don't care now what the reason for Rachel's death was, because nothing can be fixed," lamented the inconsolable fiancé. Maybe she had some enemies? After all, Rachel was a wealthy girl, the heiress of a large fortune, the owner of a company. What enemies could she have? Besides, nothing is missing. Neither money nor valuables. Everything is in place. Except for her, and Stephen, unable to hold back, broke down and cried heavily. The investigator apparently realized it was cruel to question a man who had suffered such a heavy loss any further and let him go. The case could be closed. The girl simply died of heart failure. Sad, but it happens. What can you do? And so Stephen entered the morgue, where there were no people at that hour. He was met by an orderly, a hulking brute whose face alone suggested he had served time in prison. If anyone had any doubts, the tattoos covering his arms and chest dispelled them. Unsurprisingly, someone with a different background would hardly take such a job. Stephen, having greeted the man and realizing they were alone in the room, wiped the grief from his face and took on a businesslike demeanor. "So, where's your stiff?" he asked. "Where?" "In surgery." "Not yours, don't worry, there's plenty of work," laughed the orderly. "I've arranged everything with him, just as you asked. So you can take your fiancée and do what you want, take her to the cemetery if you like." "Did you come alone?" "Alone? Who else would I bring? Bury her and be done with it, without any ceremonies. She has no relatives, and her friends can remember her however they want. Your call, if you're not afraid of any extra questions." "But wait, what do you mean by bury her?" The man started. "Are we supposed to handle the burial too? Who else is going to do it? You have your own people here, just do everything properly. I've already bought the burial plot, the grave is dug, you just need to lower her in and cover her up." "Well, we know our job, but you'll have to pay. Both for the work and for the silence." "Oh, bloodsuckers. I'll pay extra, no choice. Just get it done quickly, so there are no questions. And then take a photo of the grave and send it to me." "Got it. Are you going to say goodbye?" "Get lost. You're used to this, but I can't stand seeing corpses. So do it yourselves. Deal? I handled everything well, didn't I? And thanks to you, I couldn't have done it alone." And so they settled the matter, not knowing that the deceased, already placed in the coffin, had regained consciousness. She had started to feel and hear things while being prepared for the funeral, but it couldn't be said that she had fully come to. She heard everything, understood everything, but couldn't move a finger, couldn't make a sound, or even take a deep breath. Rachel lay as she had been placed by indifferent hands, not understanding what was happening. She couldn't move now due to the effects of the substances Stephen had poisoned her with. And there was no doubt he did it. There was simply no one else. Why? The reason was clear: for money. It happened when he himself suggested bidding farewell to bachelorhood. He was so sweet and helpful. It was that last evening when the white wine had a strange taste. And Stephen had insisted she drink the glass to the bottom. What taste? Don't imagine things. This is the best wine. I ordered 3 cases of this for our wedding, paid a fortune for it. Drink up, you'll feel a wonderful aftertaste. She felt it. Not immediately. She remembered well how Stephen left. She just couldn't understand why he looked at her so strangely. Only after he left did she feel a terrible weakness, numbness in her hands and feet. What did he mix in? Sleeping pills, some drug, and what's going to happen to her now? It seems they are about to bury her. How could this be? No, not that. She had to make every effort to somehow let people know she was alive, at least the gravediggers. Even if they finish her off, just don't bury her alive. While such thoughts swirled in the girl's head, the orderly was looking for those who would bury Rachel's body. The hospital was on the very outskirts of the city, with the cemetery starting right behind it, so the dead were either carried by relatives or transported on gurneys by the staff. In this case, there was no one. Max, where did you go? Take Albert and get to work, there's a burial to do. Albert's not here, he's been drinking, and he's been out of it for 2 days. How am I supposed to do this alone? The young gravedigger protested. Will there at least be some men among the relatives? There won't be anyone, no men, no women, no funeral, just pure pleasure. No one will be around to get in the way or give advice, and you'll get double the pay. Just think, the deceased is young and light, you'll manage to move her and bury her alone, and then take a photo of the grave. Here, I'll give you triple pay. You're all vultures here, real bloodsuckers. Let me help you put her on the gurney and get on with it. Max wasn't a vulture, though money was a pressing issue for him. Otherwise, a young guy, a student in the economics department, wouldn't have chosen this job. But he had to when his mother fell seriously ill. She begged him not to quit his studies, and he wasn't eager to do so either. But Hilda Carter needed money for treatment, and he had to find a job. What can I do, Mom? All students work part-time, he reassured her, hiding where he worked. His classmate's father got him the gravedigger job through connections, and Max agreed, understanding that he could earn much more in this position than by putting up posters or washing dishes in a cafe. There were no other options. So, he became a gravedigger. The job wasn't for the faint-hearted, but Max had a strong psyche and tried not to take to heart what happened around him. Although some colleagues advised him, Max, you won't last long in this job without a drink, that's why we end up drinking. So, don't be stubborn, have a drink with us. Max refused, earning the respect of his co-workers. Why would he drink? He's a student, he'll graduate and become somebody. There's nothing special about our job. Someone has to bury the dead, they can't lie in the middle of the road, others defended him. Max wasn't afraid of becoming an alcoholic. He never liked alcohol, neither for solace nor for fun. Although the work was tough, both physically and mentally. And even though he understood its necessity, it seemed shameful. What if someone I know sees me, rumors will start, and Mom will find out. So, he not only changed into work clothes, but also tried to alter his appearance. He bought a thick beard from a theatrical shop and wore it when he went to his grim job, which brought serious gloom. And today, one of the employees was off, his partner was drinking, so he had to handle the burial alone. These are strange funerals. They said there's a young girl in the coffin, yet no relatives or acquaintances. What's to make of it? Maybe she was a very bad person whom no one wanted to know? Or sick, and everyone had been expecting her death for years? or completely alone. Strange, of course, but that wasn't his concern. Max didn't know and never would. After wheeling the gurney to the already dug grave, thanks to Albert, who had helped dig it before he started drinking, Max carefully removed the not-so-heavy coffin and set it on the ground. There was a faint rustling sound from inside. It seemed the coffin was too large, and the deceased had shifted slightly. How am I supposed to lower her by myself? Max thought in frustration. Whoever she was, it's not right to just dump her in. Meanwhile, Rachel was desperately trying to signal to the person who was about to bury her alive. She was alive. Alive. But she couldn't move or part her stiffened lips. She did manage to open her eyes, which gave her hope that her other limbs might start moving too, as long as it wasn't too late. Was she really going to be buried now? Her brain was sending signals to her arms and legs, but they wouldn't move. Or were they? It seemed the tips of her fingers were starting to twitch, but what good was that? The coffin was already being moved. They were likely about to push her into the grave, and that would be the end. Yes, the boards meant to be her eternal bed were tilting, her body slid lifelessly against them, her head bumped against the lid. What was this? Her throat seemed to wake up, and a faint moan escaped through her closed lips. But it was too quiet to be heard, especially by the man outside who was busy with his task, the earth and small stones scraping and rustling under the coffin. Then the coffin fell to the bottom of the grave. The girl's head jerked and hit the bottom with a dull thud, which jolted Rachel awake. Her mouth finally opened, and she managed to let out a scream that proved she was alive. Max froze in horror when he heard the scream from the coffin. I've worked too much. No, it must have been my imagination. The coffin creaked. Hopefully, it didn't fall apart, he tried to reassure himself. A corpse, whose death should have been confirmed by doctors, can't just come back to life. And the pathologist must have performed an autopsy. Still, a chill ran down his spine, and it seemed the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He sat on the edge of the grave, catching his breath. Silence. Yes, of course, it was just my imagination. I should see a psychiatrist myself. I need to bury this quickly and get out of here. Then another, much clearer moan came from below. This couldn't be dismissed as a hallucination. Max jumped into the grave and asked, "Are you alive?" Knowing how foolish it sounded. There was no coherent answer, but the moans spoke for themselves. Max struggled, breaking his nails, to open the coffin lid and gasped. A young girl looked at him with eyes full of horror and despair. "You're alive," Max mumbled again, "we need to get out." "You probably need a doctor." He really didn't know what to do, so he suggested the most practical thing, "Let me help you out." "Water," the girl whispered when they got out. Fortunately, Max had water with him. He always brought some, knowing it would be hard to find a drink at the cemetery. He brought the bottle to the girl's lips, and she drank greedily, almost finishing half a liter at once. Max took the bottle away. "You can't drink too much at once. Who did this terrible thing to you?" The girl, after drinking, started to regain her strength. But she was in no hurry to answer his questions. She tilted her face up, looked at the clear sky, and, closing her eyes, whispered, "What happiness?" and let her head fall weakly onto Max's shoulder. "Yes, you're alive," he agreed, bewildered and unsure what to do next. "You probably need to go to the hospital." "How could this happen?" "It's simple. Someone needed me dead, tried to poison me, but it didn't work." "Then to the police?" "How do you feel?" "I don't want to go anywhere. Not to the police, not to the hospital. I don't want him to know I'm alive." Max realized that she was still resting her head on his shoulder, not out of affection but out of weakness. She needed to see a doctor, and the police needed to be involved. Did she really want the person who tried to kill her to go unpunished? "Have you forgiven him?" he asked. "No. I don't want him to escape, and he has every chance to do so," she whispered. "He'll get proof that you're gone, and then we can act with a clear conscience." A doctor will take samples, figure out what they tried to poison you with, make a report, and the police will open a case. I'm a witness. I'll go to the police with you. You need to see a doctor as soon as possible. I can see you're not feeling well." He quickly buried the empty coffin, took a photo, and sent it to his boss as proof of the job done. Now he needed to figure out what to do with the resurrected girl. Stephen, upon receiving the photo of his fiancée's grave, was ecstatic. He had pulled off everything so brilliantly and executed it perfectly. That young fool had instantly believed in his love, and he could now feel at ease. What could be better than marrying the heiress of a substantial fortune? Especially since she was young and attractive. Yes, there was no arguing with that. He could have married Rachel, taken control of her and her money, and lived a beautiful life. But there were several obstacles, the first and foremost being Melissa Warren. He couldn't say he truly loved this woman, but she fascinated him. Stephen felt that with her, he would find happiness. Yes, she wasn't the young and pretty Rachel. She worked as a department head at the farm owned by his late fiancé's father, and later by Rachel herself. Of course, her fortune wasn't as large as Rachel's, but the prospects were much more attractive. Money was good, of course, no one would argue with that, but money had a way of running out. He himself was an heir, orphaned in his youth, while still a freshman in college, and he knew very well how quickly money could disappear. He had barely finished college when he was practically penniless, selling off his possessions. Now that he seemed like an adult, it didn't matter. His vice was incurable and only worsened with age. So Rachel's money would have disappeared just as quickly as his father's had. And what would he be left with? A wife? Even if she was beautiful and loving, she would be unloved by him. And she was one of those women who wouldn't be easy to get rid of. Plus, she would undoubtedly start having children right away. That meant extra burdens guaranteed. With Melissa, everything would be different. She knew how to make money and could keep him in check. Secretly, Stephen longed for someone to keep him under strict control. Yes, with her, he wouldn't go astray. She could get what she wanted and pull him out of the pit he was steadily falling into. This wasn't the delicate and sensitive Rachel who would whine and plead reproachfully. Living with someone like Rachel would make him eager to get involved in anything just to avoid going home. Even during the courtship, it was hard for him to pretend to be in love. He could have taken his time with the elimination. First, marry her, then later. But several circumstances hindered this. The main one was Melissa. She seemed to be in love with Stephen and had serious plans for him. She was also very jealous. She didn't consider it a major flaw that her man was seemingly courting another girl. On the contrary, she fully supported the plan, understanding its purpose. Moreover, she was always aware of what was happening. Every date took place with her knowledge and according to her script, and then everything was discussed in detail. Stephen didn't find this humiliating, especially since it reassured him of his beloved's intelligence and foresight. "I hope it doesn't bother you that I continue this relationship. I assure you, it brings me no pleasure at all," he said after such discussions. "Stop it, don't be silly," Melissa laughed. "I understand everything and know that it's all for our future. I think you wouldn't like it if I started a similar game. But I hope, thanks to the success of our venture, I won't have to do that. Just try it." Stephen was frightened. But when he mentioned that Rachel was hoping for a quick marriage, Melissa became serious and thoughtful, then said unusually sternly, "This must be avoided. I'm not really keen on it myself. I mean, I don't want it at all. But think about it, how else? Why else did we need all this?" Stephen was surprised. "Everything can be done without marriage and without Rachel," she explained. So, the plan to eliminate the girl began to be discussed. Melissa had been subtly pushing him toward this decision before, and though he might have been horrified at first, he soon calmly thought that the only way out was Rachel's death. Realizing this made the dates with her even less burdensome. And there didn't seem to be any great sin in what he was about to do, especially since Melissa had said, "Don't throw words around. Murder is when you kill with your hands, with a knife, or with a gun. This way, there won't be much sin on you. Well, if you don't agree, you can go to church later and confess. That's all well and good, Melissa. But how will I inherit everything if I'm not her legal husband? Stephen was puzzled. No, but I see you've decided to disappoint me completely, she exclaimed. Or do you really want to marry that sheep? If so, don't hesitate to say it. I don't mind. Just keep in mind that I don't see married men. That's just my principle, sorry, she said coldly, without trying to convince him of anything. No, Melissa, of course not, Stephen mumbled. Well, if not, then what are we even talking about? She raised an eyebrow in surprise. I'm talking about something else. If I'm not married to her, why would I inherit anything? Stephen really didn't understand this. And how long do you plan to be married to her to get the inheritance? 5 years or 25? No, of course not. But how long do I need to be married to get it? He really didn't know this and thought he could start eliminating his wife almost immediately after the wedding. But Melissa explained the impossibility of such a situation. I don't know how long to get the inheritance, but 1 year is clearly not enough to avoid getting a prison sentence. A year, Stephen. Are you going to live with her for a year while I wait the whole year? As a mistress to a married man? Meeting you secretly? I've explained to you, there will be nothing like that in my life. So, you'll have to rush and end up not with an inheritance but in prison. Can you imagine how investigators will start digging when they find out that a young, rich woman, newly married and leaving a huge inheritance, suddenly died for no apparent reason? They'll turn everything inside out, and no amount of money will help you. Think about that. And as for getting everything she has? Leave that to me. I'll find a way to sort everything out. Don't forget, I work with her and know a bit more than she'd like or anyone else. And no one will suspect anything, Melissa assured. She could handle everything and deal with any problems. So, all he had to do was a trifle. He needed to mix into Rachel's food or drink what Melissa, his guiding star, had procured. Don't worry. It's a reliable method, no autopsy will show anything. And there won't be one, I'll arrange it, she said. With her, nothing was scary. Everything became clear and simple. It was foolish to fear anything with such a woman by his side. And he wasn't afraid. Everything worked out so well. And he had something to praise himself for. How masterfully he had feigned despair before the investigator, who didn't even ask any extra questions. After all, why torment a man who wanted to marry, but his bride, a young beauty, suddenly died for no apparent reason? Try not to sympathize with such a person. And he seemed to have no benefit from her death. So, why question him further? But as a bereaved fiancé, he did not fail. Sometimes he even felt offended that he couldn't boast about his success, about the deal he had so successfully pulled off. You can't just go up to someone and say, "Look how well I handled everything." Only Melissa knew. Well, they had done everything together. She was the brains, and but he also played a significant role. No one could say he had stood aside while his beloved took care of their future happiness. That's what he thought as he looked at the photo of the mound under which Rachel was forever laid to rest. Did he feel sorry for her? Well, yes, in a way, he did, although one could also look at it from another perspective. He hadn't so much destroyed her as he had perhaps saved her from all the troubles ahead. What would have awaited her with such a character? If not him, Stephen, then some other opportunist would have gone after her wealth, stripped her to the bone, and that would be it. What awaited this girl, and what would she have left with her beauty and youth? Moreover, her beauty was of the kind that would fade quickly. Besides, she wanted children, not just one, but preferably more than two, she had told him. What would she look like after the third birth? And she was too trusting, too naive. People would deceive her at every step. It was clear that living in peace and contentment with such a character was unlikely. And she wasn't accustomed to any other life. the only daughter of a rich man. Obviously, she needed everything to always be top-notch. But her father had died. Clearly, no one would take special care of her now. And she couldn't do it herself. So, of course, it was a pity, but what could be done? The main thing now was for Melissa's plan to succeed, so that Rachel's money could be easily taken over. Stephen didn't yet know what she had in mind, but he was confident he could rely on his beloved. He didn't know, as he pondered, that the prematurely departed Rachel was already sitting in the investigator's office, writing a statement against him. She had flatly refused to return home until everything was clarified, and Max had to take her to his small apartment, which he shared with his mother, Hilda. Rachel and Hilda got acquainted and even grew attached to each other. Hilda felt great sympathy for the girl, left an orphan and finding herself in such a terrible situation. And Rachel found an older friend on whose shoulder she could cry out her grief. Max's mother also believed that the criminal needed to be exposed as quickly as possible. Tests were done, and the doctors had already determined what the girl had been poisoned with. The relevant certificate was added to the case. Max went to the police with Rachel as a witness, and soon everyone involved in the crime was giving testimony, including Stephen, shocked at how his successfully started plan had unraveled. But there was nothing to be done, and under the weight of all the evidence, he had to confess to what he had done. The only thing he concealed was Melissa's involvement. Partly because this woman was still dear to him, but there was another reason why Stephen wanted her to remain free. Firstly, she was his only close person. There was no doubt that all friends and acquaintances would turn away from him, and he had no relatives left. And it's unlikely anyone would want to deal with him, knowing what he was accused of. But from Melissa, he could expect sympathy. Who else but her would support him through all the long years of imprisonment? And perhaps she would meet him when he was released. If that were the case, there was hope that he wouldn't be lost with her. If Melissa were also held accountable, he would be completely alone. So he didn't even mention her name. She remained entirely unconnected to the crime. But her fury was indescribable. Yes, she was grateful to Stephen for not betraying her, but to fail such a plan. Of course, she was also to blame. He must have miscalculated the dose, but even under those conditions, something could have been done, and it wasn't just him. Melissa had failed on all fronts. Firstly, she had hoped that after Rachel's death, she would not only gain all her money but also the company. She had the leverage to make that happen. And a lot of money had already been spent to pull it off. Secondly, she hoped to finally arrange her personal life. Yes, she was a bit older than Stephen, already over 30, and any woman knows that's a significant milestone. Then Stephen appeared in her life. He was exactly the kind of husband she could only dream of. Manageable, obedient, moreover, wanting to be controlled, a pawn husband, the kind of man every businesswoman with a strong character dreams of. They would have lived happily ever after, and he would have been grateful to her until the end of his days. And now what? No husband, no money, no company. So much effort had gone into this. And all because of whom? That gray mouse. Her only virtue was being born with a silver spoon in her mouth. It's not hard to achieve everything with a father like that. Melissa, having come from the very bottom, had to strive all her life to achieve something, and she did strive. And she had achieved it, but now, look. That wretch couldn't even die, even though she was helped. But Melissa wasn't going to calm down. She decided she would still take revenge on her rival, ensuring that she ended up with nothing. Of course, Rachel was unaware of these plans. Having fully recovered from what had happened, she was happy. Happy like anyone who feels reborn. She had not only been under threat, but she had already been in the grave. And now she was alive. She could live and enjoy every step, every sip of water. Moreover, she had found a family for the first time in a long while. Rachel and Max talked a lot, sharing their stories, which inevitably led them to fall in love with each other. Learning that Max was studying economics, she convinced him that he could quit his unpleasant job as a gravedigger and join her company. She could use a reliable assistant, especially since there was clearly a malcontent in the office who was occasionally causing serious disruptions. Max, of course, agreed, especially since the salary she offered was much higher than what he could earn as a gravedigger. Additionally, Rachel offered a substantial advance, which finally allowed him to pay for Hilda's surgery. He wanted to refuse, but Rachel said, "Please forgive me, Max, but in this situation, I'm not doing this for you, but for your mother. I've grown to love her. She has become dear to me, and why shouldn't I help her? So, even if you refuse, the surgery will still happen." Max didn't argue. He wanted his mother to be healthy but wanted to pay for it himself. He also wanted to succeed at work, so he began to delve into all the intricacies of the business. He did this subtly and delicately, without drawing attention. No one could say that the boss's new boyfriend had appeared and might cause some trouble. If someone had hinted to Max that he was hired only because he was familiar with the boss and had saved her in some way, he would have quit immediately. However, no one said that because his colleagues saw that the young man was working diligently. He was the first to uncover Melissa's plan, realizing that she intended to ruin Rachel and possibly seize all the company's assets. Having made this discovery, he, of course, exposed the wrongdoer. Moreover, he figured out her involvement in everything that had happened. This was not surprising. The company's employees, if they didn't know for sure, suspected that Melissa had relations with Rachel's former fiancé. Maybe not a relationship, but in any case, they interacted quite closely. Someone even said they were relatives. But Max understood this wasn't the case. Most likely, the head of the department wanted not so much to seize Rachel's money as to take revenge on her for something. He told her directly, "I know you were somehow connected with Stephen and probably knew about his plans, maybe even participated in them. You scoundrel! It's not enough that you've disgraced me, that your lover will now fire me with a tainted record, but you also want to get me into criminal trouble. What I had with Stephen is none of your business. And whatever you suspect, you won't be able to prove anything. And if you start talking too much, remember, I have some arguments against you too." This threat was so foolish and helpless that Max just smirked. "All right, calm down. I'm not going to talk. And I understand perfectly that proving anything will be impossible. Unless your lover starts talking about it, which he apparently won't, because he still has some plans for you. Just know that your guilt in the attempted murder is already uncovered and live with that for as long as you want. I'll live, but we'll see how you live, you ladies' man. Do you think you can keep writing on the fact that you saved Rachel by accident?" But Max didn't even bother listening to this angry accusation and turned, walking out of the office. Melissa was indeed fired without much scandal, but her reputation was tarnished for a long time, maybe forever. Max was promised her position, but to take the role of department head, he needed to finish his studies. However, this didn't worry him. He was happy. He and Rachel loved each other and planned to marry after he graduated. Moreover, his mother had successfully undergone surgery and was recovering quickly. So, for people who had gone through such a terrible ordeal, things were going quite well. In fact, they were wonderful. And the future promised nothing but happiness. As for Stephen, things were not going well for him. He was convicted and sent to prison, where he would spend many long years. But it turned out that not only Rachel had misjudged him, cunning and enterprising Melissa had as well. Love wasn't the reason this man committed such a terrible crime. His plans were far more selfish. Yes, he was a dedicated gambler, but extremely unlucky, mostly losing. So, he decided to improve his already shaky financial situation first with Melissa's help. Fortunately for her, he quickly realized that nothing substantial would come from this experienced woman and turned his attention to the young, trusting, and much wealthier Rachel. And everything turned out so perfectly. He was on the brink of realizing all his dreams, most importantly to get rid of his debts. Who knew this foolish girl would turn out to be so resilient? I should have been more generous. I should have poisoned her more. Well, now I'm in jail. Honestly, he even felt relief when he was arrested. I mean, this is bad, awful, of course, but on the other hand, at least he is protected, at least temporarily, from creditors. People lent him serious money that they wouldn't forgive. But it turned out that prison is not another planet. The same creditors have connections everywhere, especially in the criminal world. So, soon after the trial, when he ended up in prison, a serious man from that world approached him again and said his debt was now transferred to him. And Stephen must repay. Moreover, the debt doubled because the pathologist who refused to autopsy the girl and the orderly were convicted in the same case. What? How can I repay while I'm here? Do you think they brought me here with a bag of money? Stephen even protested against such a statement. That's your problem now, they replied. If you want to live out your sentence peacefully, please pay. Otherwise, don't worry, of course, no one will kill you, but you may end up taking matters into your own hands, as life here will be quite amusing. Stephen thought and quickly found a way out. The next day, he approached the same person and said, I have no money and won't have any, and you can do whatever you want with me, it won't change that. However, I know where you can easily get some. There will be even more than I owe. Much more, he informed the interested parties, of course, Rachel's address. Being his man in her house, he knew exactly where to find money and other valuables. He drew up a detailed plan and wished them luck. I hope everything works out for you because I have no other plans, and I can't make money out of thin air, he said with a hint of audacity. This information about Stephen was passed on to his accomplices who were still at large. They carried out an attack on the house. Once again, it was Max who disrupted their plans, not as a gravedigger this time, but for the umpteenth time literally burying the criminals' plans. They managed to steal some things, but the main valuables remained in the house. However, Max himself was seriously injured. He was wounded and taken to the hospital. He needed a blood transfusion. So what's the problem? Blood transfusions are done routinely now, and people live longer afterward. Rachel fretted over the young man's health. The blood type is very rare. Unfortunately, we don't have it right now. We're searching, but time is against us, the doctor replied. But I have the same blood type. Why not me? I'm willing to do anything to save this man, she cried. But first, the potential donor needed to be examined to determine if donating blood wouldn't cause more harm than good. The doctor who conducted the examination shrugged. Forgive me, but where do you plan to donate blood? You're pregnant. What? Rachel exclaimed, stunned by this news. It's quite simple. And I can see it's been several months already. Have you not looked in the mirror? Rachel lowered her eyes to her belly and realized the doctor was absolutely right. Of course, her belly wasn't too big yet, but it was definitely not the same as usual. She compared some other signs and dates and understood that Stephen hadn't completely left her life. She was carrying his child. True, at that moment, she had no time to deal with this. She understood that saving Max was the top priority. And the child, well, he was under her protection now. She couldn't influence this situation anymore. She managed to find donors for the blood transfusion. And Max recovered fairly quickly. Rachel was sincerely happy about this, but she also feared meeting the man she had already grown to love. Did she have the right to hope for something more now? After all, she would soon become a mother, and the child would be from a man who wanted to kill her. Her life was too tangled. Pregnancy was becoming more obvious with each passing day, as if the child had hidden himself until now and didn't want to show that he already existed. Rachel herself was completely distracted to monitor her own condition. There had been too many shocks recently. But what would Max say if he saw her with this belly? The child clearly wasn't his. And despite learning about his condition daily, she still couldn't bring herself to enter his ward. Instead, his mother did. Hilda had recently undergone surgery herself and was in the same hospital. They hadn't told her what had happened to her son. Only when his condition improved did she learn that Max had narrowly escaped death but was now okay. She couldn't refrain from visiting her son in such a situation, reached his department, entered the ward, and rushed to the bed. "My boy, what happened to you? Are you alive? Are you okay? How did this happen?" His mother spoke in a rush. "Yeah, everything's fine, Mom." "Why did you even get up?" her son reassured her. "Well, there was a minor accident here, so to speak. But as you can see, I'm alive and well. There's no reason to worry. Tell me, have you seen Rachel? Why hasn't she come in? Is everything okay with her?" "Oh, I don't know. I hope she's all right. Was she with you when the accident happened? At least she's not in the hospital." "I haven't heard anything about that. I need to ask the doctors," she replied. A nurse entered to reprimand the patient who had left her ward without permission. Hearing the conversation between mother and son, she asked, "Who are you talking about? Rachel Morris? She calls 10 times a day asking about your condition. She's here at the hospital and seems to be near the attending physician wanting to talk about you. Why isn't she coming here, I wonder?" "What? What did you say?" "Morris," exclaimed Hilda. "Oh my God, this can't be." "What can't be, Mom? What are you talking about? I can't get up yet, but please find Rachel. Ask her why she's not coming. I want to see her." "I do too." "I do too," murmured his mother. "All right, I'll call the doctor now." "You seem determined to undo all his efforts," the nurse scolded her. "Where have you ever seen a patient wandering around the hospital after heart surgery, let alone getting upset about something? Calm down immediately. Your son is fine, and so is his girlfriend. She's somewhere around here. You'll recover soon and be happy if you don't behave so recklessly." "Yes, my dear, I'll go. I'll try to find Rachel. I really need to," she said. She couldn't immediately explain to her son why she needed the girl. Despite the nurse's reassuring words, the mother couldn't calm down because events from the distant past came before her eyes. Over 20 years ago, a wealthy man approached her, a young girl going through a very difficult period in her life. Recently, during difficult childbirth, his wife and child died simultaneously. Hilda then worked in his firm, experienced a difficult romance that ended in nothing, the deaths of her parents and brother, and she was very upset about this. Her boss turned to her with a rather strange request. "Hilda, I know about your difficulties, and you know about mine." He gestured to stop the girl who was about to bring some condolences. "I have a proposal for you. You are young, healthy. I have been completely alone. I need a child to replace the one who died. I suggest you give birth for me. Are you agree?" Hilda did not agree. The request seemed completely wild to her. She even thought that the man was a bit crazy because of her upset. But no. He spoke absolutely seriously. And the conversation did not end there, but continued next time. The boss offered her good money for the birth of the child, and Hilda really needed it at that time. Her parents and older brother died 6 months ago. She was left all alone. The funeral was too expensive. She borrowed money and now they needed to be returned. In short, she agreed. That's how her daughter came into the world, whom she only saw during childbirth. By an unwritten agreement, she wasn't even allowed to breastfeed the baby. Honestly, she had hoped to remain close to her daughter, not as the boss's wife, but at least as a nanny. But no. He immediately told her she would never see her daughter again, and the secret of her birth had to be kept forever. Her daughter's father was named William Morris. So now she hurried to the attending physician's office to see her daughter and finally revealed the secret of her birth. She knew Rachel's father had died, so there was nothing left to hide. The girl had to know who her real mother was. The meeting was quite difficult for both of them. Most of all, Rachel was surprised to find out that Max was actually her brother, though they had already started to feel something for each other. She confessed this to Hilda, who started crying again. "Well, I guess I have to tell you all the secrets. He's not your brother at all. He's my adopted son. Yes, that's how it happened. I refused one child and adopted another. After I gave you away, I couldn't find a peaceful minute. I knew I couldn't see my little girl anymore, and it tortured me. Moreover, whether it's fate or a boomerang, I got seriously ill shortly after your birth. I had an operation, and the doctors said I wouldn't have any more children. I wanted to take my own life. There was a neighbor woman living nearby who was wayward. She gave birth to a boy at the same time as me, Max. That's what saved me. I took care of him, even breastfed him. But then she wanted to send him to an orphanage, so I adopted him. Is your child from him, from Max? Rachel cried. No, not from him. That's why I haven't gone to see Max. I'm ashamed. We fell in love with each other, but I didn't know I was pregnant then, and now I show up with a belly. What will he think? He won't think anything bad. Think for yourself. I raised someone else's child. Your father is your biological father, but from another woman, and what of it? A child is a child. Besides, you're young, and you'll have children together. At that moment, Max cautiously came out into the corridor, holding onto the wall. He hadn't heard their conversation, but upon seeing his mom and his beloved, he smiled broadly. You two conspiring again? I know all your secrets. Then he noticed the changes in Rachel's appearance and fell silent, unsure of what to say. Rachel hung her head, turned away, preparing to leave forever. Well, she had done all she could. She had no right to impose another man's child on her beloved. Wait, what are you doing? Max and Hilda exclaimed in unison. Rachel stopped, turned around. Forgive me, Max. I think you understand everything. But you need to think about all of this, because, in short, I'll accept whatever decision you make. Wait. Hold on, the young man started after her, but his mother stopped him. She had something to tell her son. Whether it was about the past, reflections on the future, or perhaps real love that compelled him that very evening to call Rachel and say he couldn't live without her and their child. But this isn't your child, Rachel reminded him. Wasn't I also not yours before we met? And now? Now it's different. Everything is different now. Now you're dearer to me than anyone, but still, this is a child. Even more reason. Why do you think that seeing the baby, I wouldn't be able to love him just as much as I love you? Max tried to explain his feelings to her. And you will? She asked, her voice trembling with happy tears. Max could. And soon after Rachel gave birth to their son and he finished his education, they got married. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and a comment. All the best to you.